So welcome everyone to the workshop. This is all about writing bridges and rewriting your songs, because I think once you have a rough draft of a song, the next step is to start refining and editing. So what we're going to focus on today is really helping you become a better songwriter. So obviously, we're all here because we want to learn. And what I want to really have stick with you is that becoming a really great songwriter takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of practice. So I'd like everybody to think about focusing on getting just 1% better every day or every month or every week. Just small increments of improvement will add up over time to where, this time next year, you'll be writing songs that you never even thought that you would be able to write. Also, be sure to practice using these tools after this workshop, because you really won't get the full impact if you watch this and then don't make any effort to try anything different. So I would challenge you to really make an effort to try different techniques. Also, don't get discouraged if you're not where you want to be. Ashley Gorley, who wrote 2 songs a week for 7 years, which is over 3,600 songs, he wrote that many songs before he even had his first hit. Today, Ashley Gorley has 56 #1 country songs under his belt, and he owns a publishing company where he actually promotes and develops other songwriters. So if you feel like you're not getting to where you need to be, just keep plugging away at it, keep learning, and keep practicing the good ways to do that. Let's review a little bit what we talked about in our past workshop. So in our verses workshop, we talked about the verses set up the situation, and it establishes the who, when, and the where of the song. And then your chorus is the main emotional idea of your song, where it establishes the main why and really what the song is about. Also, the bridge, what we're going to talk about today, is where it takes us somewhere new. It gives us a break from what we've already heard in the song, and it helps to expand the idea or the concept of the song, and also sometimes gives us a expansion on the story. So if you're writing more of a story song, it can be a way to add to the story, or it can also be a way to summarize what has already been said. So we're going to dive in deeper to that. And then we're also going to do some listening to some hit songs to really find what did they do for their bridges as well. So what is a bridge, and what role do they play, and how can we use them in our own writing? What is a bridge? A bridge is a section that contrasts with the verses and also your chorus. So one of the goals that you have as a writer is to try to go somewhere different, and think about the bridge as a literal bridge that takes you somewhere else, and then you come back to sort of your last chorus or last verse in the song. Because we've talked about in other workshops where we've talked about sort of the rule of 2 or the tool of 2, where once you've done something twice, don't do it again until you've done something else. So in the concept of a bridge, you've already done usually a verse and a chorus and a verse and a chorus. So you've done each of those section groups twice. So you don't necessarily want to do that again. So your bridge is your B section that takes you somewhere else, that gives you and the listener that contrast, so they're not getting bored hearing the same thing over and over again. So a lot of times also when I'm writing bridges, I think about the question that it answers for the listener is sort of, where do we go from here and what happens next? So we talked about the verses are who, when, where. Your chorus is your why, and then your bridge is where do we go from here and what happens next. And also in your bridge, contrast should come in as many ways as possible. So that means lyrical contrast, it would be melodic contrast, harmonic contrast, production contrast. If you're playing live, it would also mean, just maybe if you're playing guitar, maybe your strumming pattern or how you're playing your instrument. Make it different than what you've done in other parts of your song. And sometimes a bridge will act like another verse in the advancement of your story, but again, it should sound different than the other verses and also the chorus because it does take us somewhere new. And Camden, I see you have your hand raised. Do you have a question?
So you said that bridges should contrast as many ways as possible, but I'm wondering, is there a way, is there like such a thing as too much contrast? Like, is there a way to like make a bridge really fit with your song? Like, like I don't remember like the last session we had on Thursday. I remember I talked about like choruses and verses, and I said matching, but what I really kind of meant was compliments. But I said matching by mistake. But yeah, um,
I mean, I think the concept of contrasting too much is really a subjective thing, right? So I think it really depends on how it sounds to you as the songwriter, and are you taking it somewhere too far? I would say that we probably err on the side of not contrasting enough, more so than contrasting too much, because a lot of times there are times where if you totally change to a weird key that sort of took it somewhere that didn't match the emotional content of the lyric, there may be times where that would throw your listener off and they might be like so thrown out of the song that would have a negative effect. But if you're keeping at least some form of familiarity within that bridge and most everything else is changing, then you're probably safe. But the idea is you want it to sound different. So you don't want it to sound like a different song necessarily, but just enough difference to where it gives people a break from what they've already heard, if that makes sense.
right.
And bridges can also you can also think of bridges as a summarizing part of the song. So bridges give you another opportunity to summarize or highlight the main idea of the song. A lot of times that is coming in the chorus because the chorus is really the part of the song that repeats more than any other. So that's really slamming that hook home. It's really giving you that main idea of the song. And your bridge gives you another chance as a writer to just kind of pull it all together and tell your listener again, like, maybe here's another way to look at it, or here's what I'm really trying to tell you. But again, it happens in a different way than your chorus. So you don't want your bridge to necessarily sound like the chorus. And think about your song sections this way. So verses are developmental. They're really the building blocks of setting your listener up for what's to come in the chorus. So you're giving them all of those details to really know what the chorus means when we get there. And then the choruses are that central theme and really what the song is about. And your chorus should really explain pretty succinctly what the idea or what the concept of the song is. And I think what you should be thinking about too is, are all of these parts working together to deliver your intended emotion? You know, I think a lot of times as writers, we think about situations and we try to write about situations, but what we're really trying to do and what our goal should be is to deliver an emotion to your listener and have your listeners have an emotional experience. Because all of us, I think, want people to like our songs. And I think the reason why people like songs is because they have an emotional connection to them. So then in this grand concept of things, bridges then again help you summarize everything. So verses are developmental, choruses are central, bridges help summarize. And in this context, your pre-chorus can fall into a summarizing section as well. So many times your pre-chorus is going to summarize your verse and tell you what to get ready for in your chorus. Is it possible to make a good, great song where the music doesn't change? Yes. So in that example, like, you can have your song have the same chord progression. It can maybe be built on some sort of loop, or it can be built on some sort of beat or something that goes throughout the entire song. But if your chord progression and if your groove stay the same through the entire song, then that means you need to create contrast lyrically and you need to create contrast melodically. So in lyrical contrast, you have different ways that you can do that. So lyrical contrast comes from the number of lines that you use, the length of lines that you use, the rhythms of the lines that you use, also your rhyme scheme, and then also your rhyme types. And then when you think about melody, the contrast comes from the number of phrases, the length of the phrases, what are the rhythm of the notes, where are the notes starting in the bar? Are they starting on the downbeat? Are they starting before the downbeat? Are they starting after the downbeat? And then really just where do they repeat? So there's a lot of ways that you can create contrast that's not necessarily happening within the harmony. So when I say contrast in as many ways as possible, you will have something or a part of the song that stays consistent, but the other parts really to give your listener something to hold on to should have that change or give them something different. So when you do come back to what they've already heard, it feels like they're coming home and it gives them that sense of familiarity that is like the anthemic last chorus of your song. The other thing about songs is you don't always need a bridge. So you'll find that a lot of songs don't necessarily have a traditional bridge. And even some new, more modern, like pop and rock songs, don't have anything that changes. They might just change the chorus a little bit. And a lot of new songs that you're seeing come out now are like less than 2 minutes long, and some songs are even like 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So it's the world of Spotify and TikTok that we're starting to live in as well. So what are some bridge alternatives then if you are thinking, well, I don't necessarily need a bridge, but there's something that I want to add? So some bridge alternatives would be you could do an instrument solo, or you could have like a dance break where the groove or different samples or like vocal loops and different things happen depending on the genre of music that you're doing. You could also repeat the pre-chorus. That's something that I've done in some of the songs that I've written, is instead of having a bridge, I go back to a pre-chorus, but I change the production or like the effects or how I'm playing it. You could also do a drop chorus, which a drop chorus we've all heard where you sort of drop out the instruments and it's almost a cappella, where it's almost like vocal and drums. You could also repeat a verse, but you could do it with a new melody. You could do it with new chords. You could change the groove, those types of things. Or you could just do a little short musical turnaround as well. Looks like Eves has a hand raised. Did you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I'd like to know in a song if you could probably have a verse, a chorus, a pre-chorus, a chorus, and a bridge.
So say that again. You would have a verse, chorus, or verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge?
Yeah, because usually if you have a pre-chorus, usually you don't have a bridge. But can you have a song and combining verse, pre-chorus, chorus, and a bridge?
Yes. So a lot of songs you will hear where they have a verse, a pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, chorus. So having a pre-chorus or a bridge, you don't have to have either or, because they're doing different jobs. So your pre-chorus is usually, and some people call pre-choruses bridge, but I like to call them ramps, because what your pre-chorus does is it ramps your song from your verse to the chorus. And sometimes if you write a song where your verse is saying something and then you get to the chorus and you're like, wow, that doesn't quite make sense, like there's a gap, your pre-chorus can be that ramp that leads from your verse up to your chorus. And then your bridge, of course, takes you away from having to hear all of those other parts again. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, a bit, but say about genre, like say heavy metal, because I know there's like in progressive rock, there's probably sometimes more diversity in the song. because I don't know how to explain that, but it's like Dream Theater. They have probably more section in other genre.
Yeah, so I'm not as familiar with like progressive rock, so I wouldn't be able to speak to any examples, but I think that's the key to a lot of this is listen to music that you like or music that you're interested in and really analyze what it's doing. And even if you don't know what to call the section, you can like just call it section A. So any section that sounds like the first section, call that A. The next section would be B and C and so forth. And I think you'll find that there's some sort of pattern that you can emulate within your own writing. So I think a great way to learn is to really just study the songs that you hear, because there's really not one way to do all of this stuff. And there are definitely songs that sort of break a lot of the rules, but as you start to analyze them, you'll see that they're actually doing it in a very thoughtful and intentional way. And the thing to keep in mind is what your song is doing structurally, those decisions should be made in context of how is that affecting the emotion of what you're trying to say. So just doing something just to do it isn't necessarily useful in songwriting. It's always good to think about, is this helping me deliver the emotion that I would like to deliver, if that makes sense.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So Robert says, can you talk about chords for bridges? For example, I just realized that 2 songs I recently wrote have bridges that start on the second minor. For example, in the key of G, the A minor is the second minor. So what I would say there, Robert, is for like those chord choices is, does that chord give you the emotion that you're looking to get out of your bridge? And is it different than what you have done in other parts of the song? So one of the ways that I think about bridges and I think about chord progressions is I will look back at what I've already written and look at, are there any chords that I haven't used yet? And I will try to use a chord that I haven't used in any other part of the song, because then that instantly gives me contrast, because the listener hasn't heard that chord until we get to that bridge. So it's kind of thinking about, how do I make it different, but how do I make that bridge match what I'm trying to say? And also, how is it affecting the energy of the song? A lot of times bridges will be sort of the climax of a song, where it's like the most energy and it's sort of the build up, and then it goes into the last chorus that sort of takes the song out. But there are times where the bridge actually drops in energy to where it gives you a little bit of a calm before the storm, before the chorus comes back. So you kind of have to make decisions based on that as well. So just to summarize kind of what we have gone over, and then we're going to do some listening. So we'll actually let you guys kind of listen for what's happening, or how did they make decisions in some hit songs. So summarizing writing bridges: lyrical contrast, melodic contrast, try to give some harmonic and chord contrast as if possible. I mean, I write a lot of songs that have the same chord progression throughout the whole thing, but then I have to consciously make sure that my rhythms and my melody are different, my pitches that I'm using are different, and the groove underneath is different as well. And speaking of groove, the groove should contrast a little bit usually as well, which leads to production contrast. And your goal is really to take your listener somewhere new. It can be the climax of the song, and it can also be used to build tension that gets released in that last chorus of the song. So it builds up that pent up sort of thing where the last choruses or verses just have extra oomph when they come around. Also, your bridges can be shorter than other sections as well. And again, you don't always need a bridge. So before we start listening, does anybody else have any questions or comments on what we've covered so far? If not, let's jump into doing some listening here. So the first song we're going to listen to is a song by Taylor Swift. So as you listen to this song, listen to how the writers and the producers decided to set the bridge, and think about what's happening lyrically, think about what's happening melodically, think about what's happening with the chords and the harmony, and then also think about what happens with the groove and the production as well. So after we listen, we'll come back and we'll get your thoughts on how you receive this, and have some open discussion on it. So this is Message in a Bottle by Taylor Swift. So what parts stood out to you guys, or what did you hear as it went to the bridge? Anybody have any thoughts or comments on what was happening at that point?
Well, chorus, I guess there was the chorus before the bridge.
There was a chorus. There was actually a chorus before the bridge. I'm going to the chat. People are typing in the chat. So Hall G says key change. I actually don't think the key changed, but I think the chord progression definitely changed, but it stayed in the key. Blue said it got quieter. So the production and everything kind of came down a little bit. So going from loud to quiet, that's contrast. So that's, like we were talking about, your bridge contrast from what people have already heard. Susan says a tempo change. Possibly the tempo change, but more than likely what you're hearing is just the change in groove. And when you change groove, it changes your rhythmic momentum. So even though the tempo isn't changing, it gives you the impression that the energy is less. So a lot of times you don't even have to change tempo in order to have that feeling. It's just the way that the groove is causing that momentum to be experienced. Taja says less instruments, definitely. Jeff Campbell says was almost drop-like. It totally dropped. Blue says it changed to questions. That's something that I noticed too, because a lot of what she was saying was kind of very declarative in the other parts of the song. And then when she got to that bridge, it's starting asking questions. So that's definitely a great observation. Eve says there's two parts in the bridge. I'd have to go back and listen to see if what that means. If you show the lyrics and the words, show us the parts of the song that may be more helpful. So the lyrics that happened within the bridge of this song was the lyrics that showed up when it said when it was talking about London. So let me go back and I'll jump to right before the bridge. So actually, it sounds to me like what they did was the bridge. It had the bridge, but then it did an instrumental break, which was actually a drop chorus where you didn't hear the chorus, but it gave you the sense of the chorus. And then she just sang that last tagline before it went back to the actual chorus. So that's super cool. Anybody else have thoughts on this one? Paul says, love the cutout at the end of the bridge to reflect her wondering. For sure. Catrice.
I'm going to ask a very obvious fundamental question, but I'm a neophyte and I'm still learning. I don't know all of the implicit things that people know already. So I can't tell the difference between the bridge and the pre-chorus and the chorus. Can you break this down like you would if you were dissecting a sentence to say what the subject, verb, and prepositions are? So what part is the bridge, what part is the chorus, what part is the pre-chorus? Because there are a couple parts that do repeat, and I'm trying to figure it all out.
Sure. Let me actually do something here. Let me find the lyrics, because it might be easier to. So if you look at what's sort of happening within the lyrics here, like we mentioned, a lot of times one of the ways that you can lyrically contrast your sections is to use a different number of lines. And I see a lot of new songwriters. Every single section has 4 lines. Every single section, verse, everything. But look at what Taylor Swift does. The verse has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When you get to the pre-chorus, there's 4 lines. And then your chorus is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So every section has a different number of lines. and it also has a different rhyme scheme, and the melodies are different as well. So as you're writing your songs, be careful not to have too much similarity between your different sections, because your listener gets bored and your songs will sound blocky because it just everything is the same length, everything changes at the same time, everything sort of follows that same marching order. Whereas as the changing number of lines, changing the rhyme scheme, changing the lengths of the lines, that all keeps your listener interested because it's giving them something new every time that section comes along. So yeah, Catrice, that was a great question. And that would be, as you research songs that you like, I would suggest kind of doing what we just did. And even if you don't know what the sections are called, like I said, you could be like, this is A, this is B, this is C. And then you're like, oh, A repeats again, B repeats again, C repeats again. And then there's another part that's like, oh, that's different than anything else. So that's your D section. So it's like, well, that contrast, so that's probably the bridge, right? And it doesn't really matter what it's called as long as you know kind of why you're doing it, too. So Yves, you have your hand raised as well.
Yeah, can you add a phrase in verse 2? Like if the verse 1 there's 5 phrases, and verse 2 there's 6.
Sure, you could add in your verses if you added an extra line. I would say that I would do it intentionally if it made sense from a content perspective, like if you literally have something extra to say. But you can a lot of times use that as a way to build some tension as well, because your listener will have been used to hearing it with one less line or maybe one more line, to where it would throw off their expectation just enough to give them that little extra like kick when your next section comes in. Jay, you had your hand raised as well.
Thanks, Chad. I just wanted to keep this really brief. Going back to what Camden was asking in the chat, do bridges ever show again in a song? And really kind of what you just said on that changing. I was listening through last night on some things I was working on. And excuse me, I was working on some things and listening to some older songs that I had listened to years ago, but didn't really notice everything. And so one of the things I was listening to was George Michael's Faith album, and listening to I Want Your Sex, the bridge is in there. I was like, this guy has to be a star because he got this green light, he got this green lit, and it has 8 billion bridges in it, and it just keeps going. And it was crazy, but it was really interesting because they changed the style on each of the bridges, and it was just like, wow. It's just like a long sketch, but it was fascinating to explore that, and then just kind of listen to this class today. So
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think it's great to listen to stuff and a lot of times as music fans, I think we listen to things as just either we have it on in the background or we just love a song. But when you go into active listening mode and you start to think like, what's actually happening in this song, I think you'll be amazed at first off, the complexity of the simplicity in them, because a lot of times it's really hard to make something like sound easy, but when you start like inspecting it, it's like, wow, there's a lot of thought that went into that. So it's dissecting the songs that you like is such a great way to learn. And those are things to watch for, is like, how many lines do they have in each section? What is the melody doing? If you listen to the Taylor Swift song, you'll hear that each section has its own melodic motif, and it sort of has this melodic center that is similar to the other matching songs as well. So I do have other songs picked out to listen to in some other genres. So let me go back to my presentation here. And this time, see if you guys, I know we went back to Taylor and kind of were listening to where were the different sections. Let's see if you can listen to what you're hearing happening. And then you guys let me know what what you're hearing within the song and kind of what the structure feels like to you. So the next song that we're going to listen to is a country song. And this was a #1 country song. I think it was Song of the Year in the year that it came out. And this is some really great songwriting. This is called I Drive Your Truck. It was sung by Lee Brice. Thoughts on that one?
That bridge really delivers the message, really intensifies it, sends it home, because the guy is grieving, he's sad, and he's just, really in a sense, he's pissed off, and he's just like, you know what, bam. So it really delivers the message of the whole song, and it really, really hit me in the heart there too, listening to the way it just came out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I was like trying not to cry in front of all you guys on that one. I haven't listened to that song for a while, but I was getting chills the whole time. So yeah, definitely. And that's a great example, we've talked about in other workshops where your chorus is the same, but it means more every time you hear it. Like that is a masterwork in how to do that. Richard.
Definitely agree. And what stood out to me was that they, in that song also, production wise, there's the bridge and then kind of this drop chorus thing where they're cutting out some elements when they bring that chorus back in. And it's almost like, rather than just using the bridge to bring you back to the chorus and setting up some contrast so that chorus hits again, they're, like you were saying earlier, Chad, like they're amplifying the sense of contrast. Like, we're going to give you the chorus again, but it's not going to be the chorus you heard twice. This is like a modified version of that chorus, and then into kind of, I guess, maybe like a refrain or post-chorus thing in this one at the end with I Drive Your Truck repeating. But that was something I kind of picked up that the Taylor Swift song had done also, which was interesting.
Yeah, I think this one, I think it definitely pushes the story forward, but it does give that emotional, like it just builds so much. And then Richard, what you were referring to is that drop chorus afterward was almost like a sigh, you know what I mean? Like we built up so much emotion that we're just kind of sighing. And like, as I'm thinking about it right now, I'm actually getting chills about, I Drive Your Truck. And Beth in the chat says she noticed where the feeling changed for her was where they talked about the punch in the arm when you learn that the owner of the truck is, dead, which happened in the second verse. So your first verse set up the who, the when, and the where, but we didn't get the whole like context until that second verse. And then by the time that bridge comes along, it really just summarizes everything to what the song is about. I think it's great. Blue says agrees the bridge is an emotional climax. It's a cry and explains more of what's going on. Absolutely. And Tom says the bridge doubles down on the chorus emotionally as well. So yeah, so it's like I said earlier, it's your extra chance as a writer to really tell your listener, listen, this is what my song is about. And it's a great way to do that. Paul says the drop chorus adds to the tension and release of the song as well. For sure. It's a well done song. Just the song itself and the production is great. Any other thoughts on this one before we move on to the next song?
I thought they did a really good job in the first verse with all that imagery of the image of the tobacco can and the dog tags hanging. And you got the sense that this was a person's truck who had been in the army, but that was about it. So I just, one of the things I've heard you emphasize is that verses give a lot of the imagery and a lot of the details. And I really noticed that in this first verse, because at first I was like, it was just a lot of details, like the change in the ashtray and so forth. And to me, it seemed kind of a contrast with the things he was describing and then like the pretty piano in the background. So I thought that didn't work well, but then in the whole context of the song, it really made sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. So excellent point, Rachel. Like your verses a lot of times will have, especially the first verse will have that concrete imagery where you're sort of painting the scene, because it talked about, the money in the ashtray, the dog tags, and the army t-shirt in the back, right? Like when I first heard the song, I remember the first time that I heard it, I was thinking, oh, well, the person he's singing about is overseas, and they're serving and they're driving the truck. But then it was like, when you get to the, second verse where it talks about, mom asked if I'd been by your grave. And I just got chills there too, because that's such a way to tell your audience that the person's dead without saying they're dead, right?
Yeah.
Like they showed us instead of told us that. And we talk a lot about really great songs show things and they don't tell things. Like this is a song that does that. So when you guys are getting stuck in your own songwriting where you're like, I don't know what showing means, or I don't know if I'm doing it enough, listen to these types of songs and just really remind yourself how this was set up. It can really help you a lot. One more question in the chat. Kathleen says, when I write a song, do I map out my song or do I have a particular format? I do. So a lot of times what I will do when I'm writing a song, and let me do a whiteboard on this. So when I'm writing, a lot of times I'm starting with a concept or a title. Can everybody see the whiteboard? Cool. So what I will do is I will have my title, whatever it is, and then I will write like 1 or 2 sentences about like what is the hook of the song, which means what is it about, right? So I usually will write that, and then I'll start to think of like the verse 1, how am I going to set this up? Like where am I starting? And also, how does it relate to the chorus or to the title? And then I will just write whatever the title is here. So, or like a title line. And then I'll go to verse 2 and I'll think of how can I move that forward a little bit? So I will either advance the who of the story, the when of the story, or the where. So when we talk about who, let's say you're writing a romantic song or a love song, you could have you, me, and us, and you could do those in any order, right? Like your first verse might be about what I'm feeling. Your second verse could be about what you're reacting to how I'm feeling or how you're feeling. And then your bridge could be the us part of it. And then obviously the chorus comes back around and it's the title again, because I usually never change my choruses. I don't change the lyrics in the choruses or the melodies. And then the bridge again either advances these things, or I should say, so back up to verse 2, right? So if you're advancing the who, if you advance a when, that could be past, present, and future. But that could mean now, or past could be 5 minutes ago. It could be 2 seconds ago. It could be yesterday. It could be 50 years ago. Present obviously is right now. And the future could literally mean 5 minutes from now or longer as well. So when I get to the bridge, a lot of times I will sum up what's going on in the song with what's going to happen after all of this. So if I've already done past and present in my verses, then I will go to the future in the bridge. And if I've done like the you, me, us thing, I'll use whatever I haven't used before, or you can also repeat it too. Like you could have your first verse being like, talking about the other person, and then your verse 2 talks about us as a relationship, and then the bridge could be about the other person again. So you can repeat these things, but it gives you a thought process, or it actually gives me a way to think systematically about what am I going to say in the future sections that sort of keeps me on track, because I'm not reinventing the wheel every time that I write a song, if that makes sense. Another way that I look at it too is you can think of, let me see if I can do another thing here. So there's this technique that I learned from Tony on Songwriter Chop Shop, who is another YouTuber. If you haven't checked out his YouTube, he's got a lot of great videos. But he has this technique called so, because, but, therefore. And what this is you can use this as a storytelling device where you say, so I met this person because we were both at this party and we just clicked. But they live 8,000 miles away. Therefore, we really need to figure this out. So what Tony suggests is this here. So I met this person because we're both at a party. That's your first verse. And then second verse is we clicked. So we talk about all the ways that we clicked. And then your bridge is, but we live 8,000 miles away, so we're going to have to figure this out. So it's a really interesting way to sort of simply start doing a song outline, and thinking about like how can I, because one of the things that I think we've all run into is like they call it the curse of the second verse, where you're like, I wrote a first verse. Now where the hell do I go in my second verse? And you're like, I've said everything that I need to say. So where do I go? So you start to repeat what you've already said. Well, this is a great way to separate it into different sections to keep your listener interested as well. Another way to think about songwriting, and this, I'm going to clear this. Again, this will be posted on YouTube, so you guys will be able to watch this again if you are still taking notes. I'm going to clear. But another technique is to have a situation or problem in verse 1. So this is verse 1. The solution could be verse 2. And then the bridge is sort of the like, how do you feel about the solution? And this can be used in a lot of different contexts as well. So you could use it even from like meeting somebody new is the situation. Well, the solution could be, well, do we see this thing through? Is it just a little fling? Like what does the solution look like? And then your bridge can really take that emotional climax and say like, well, here's how I feel about the whole situation. So to go back to the question that was asked about outlining, definitely definitely I do think this stuff out because it gives me that skeleton to keep myself on track. So that was a great question though. So thank you. And this is a song performed by Katy Perry. So we're changing genres again. So this is back to kind of pop. This song is called Daisies. So what happened in the bridge or where the bridge would be for that song? Beth says instrumental bridge into the pre-chorus. Exactly. Yeah, so that was an interesting one where they did an instrumental break and then they went back to that pre-chorus that almost had no instruments and then went right back to that big chorus. So it was kind of that tension and release that they did there. So that's an example of using music to add some space within the song to give that contrast for sure. Any other thoughts from anybody else on that one? On any part of the song, not necessarily just the bridge. Paul says repeated part of verse 1 as well. So yeah, so that was actually what I would consider the pre-chorus, Paul. So it was repeating the section that was different than the verse. So yeah, so Beth picked up on it as well. But yeah, you caught that repetition though. That's great. I also noticed, did you notice it was a double length chorus too? She basically had two choruses. The first part of it, or the first half, was just kind of her voice and a guitar, and then it went more to a wider production for the second piece, and the lyrics expanded on the idea. Richard.
Good point there, Chad. And also I would note that there was a lot of contrast between sections with production where there's like, I think that was in the pre where like there's this acoustic kind of like riff going on with like strumming real frenetically on that acoustic or whatever. I think that was there. But in a sense, it's like having that strong production contrast, and even within the chorus, like you were just saying, like the energetic, you know, she jumps octave vocally that second time to the chorus. So there's a sense of contrast there. And maybe in some ways, you know, just speaking to this whole theme of contrast, that's really that much is digging into my brain because I get accused of not using contrast very well in my songs. But I'm just noticing that that bridge being just like this little instrumental and then the pre-chorus as the bridge, maybe in a song where the production doesn't shift so much section to section, that doesn't feel like as fulfilling of a bridge. But in this context, with how much was happening from section to section production wise, like that still plays very nicely and gives us a sufficient amount of that, you know, tension release or contrast and back to familiar elements.
Yeah, and I think like lyrically, I think this song is really well done, and I think they did a good job of contrasting it. I think the topic is really familiar but unique. Like they said something that's been said before in what I think is a unique way. And I think it's, for me, I hear a lot of people pick on pop music. I think it's a really crafted song in general that even though it's in a pop production right now, I think you could do a country version of it. I think you could do other genre versions of it as well. And speaking of contrast and repetition and prosody and those types of things, the next workshop that I'm doing for At Home Songwriting is Tuesday, the 22nd. And I'm calling it Song CPR, which is contrast, prosody, and repetition. So we're going to actually give you guys all these tools on how to create this contrast in your own songs. So I have one more song before we get to the rewriting portion of today. And we're going to go back a little bit, but I think some of you will like the song that we're going to look at. So let me go back and share my screen. So this time we're going to take it back a little bit and listen to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers doing a little bit more rock stuff. So this is a song called Refugee. Listen to how Tom uses everything that we've been talking about. Listen for contrasts. Listen for what are the song sections doing? How are they leading into each other? And then especially look at how he's using a break in the song for like a bridge, or what's the bridge doing? So this is Refugee. I love that song. So what are thoughts on that one from like any perspective? Bridge, other parts, kind of what we've been talking about. Anybody have any thoughts on that one? Richard?
I liked every section. Well, maybe not every section. I guess the chorus and the verses were following that same chord progression, I think. But it seemed to me like the pre-chorus had like a change of chord progression, which is kind of a cool thing that I don't do and would probably benefit from maybe playing with. So that stood out to me anyway.
Yeah, and did you notice too, like the first time, the chorus is actually just 2 lines the first time, and then the second time the chorus comes along, they repeat it twice before it goes to the bridge. So it just says, you don't have to live like a refugee, you don't have to live like a refugee. That's the chorus. So it was like, the first chorus was ultra short, which I think is super cool because it almost gives it that feel of a verse refrain song, but there's actually a verse, a pre-chorus, and then that short little chorus, which again goes to what we were talking about, where every section has a different number of lines, and that different number of lines and the different length adds contrast that keeps your listener listening. Because if you're writing songs and every single section has 4 lines, it's 8 bars long, it just becomes rote at some point, and it could be why people are not responding to your music the way that you want them to. Any other thoughts on this one, Pierre?
Yeah, totally agree. What an awesome song. I was singing along, so thanks for using that one. But yeah, and I have to use your words that you said earlier in the workshop here: complexity of simplicity. You know, Tom was just a master. Well, lyrically, the storytelling, but in this case, the bridge, just the chord changes, but just the way you look at it and look, the same kind of chord patterns, but then change it up for the bridge. But that's, you think, Tom Petty, it's simple songs, it's a few chords, but what he could do with that, man. So yeah, that to me, the bridge part, just the chord change, it kind of takes it somewhere else, and it just keeps on rocking like Tom so handsomely did his whole career. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom Petty is somebody that honestly, and if you look up different interviews that he had given over the years, he talks about songcraft. He talks about and he I think in one of the interviews that I saw with him, he said he had to do that because his rent depended on it, because he had to make sure that his listeners liked his songs. Like he wasn't coming at it like this creative genius thing where it's like whatever I put down is going to fly, right? He was like, I have to make songs that make people react, which I think is awesome. Beth says she's been super resistant to formalizing songs. She just writes and it usually works out well. But when someone compared writing songs to cooking, it clicked some. Now learning these ingredients of a song helped me to identify what's missing from my song recipes when they don't quite taste right. And she's glad she came today. Well, Beth, I'm glad that you came today too. And that's exactly these aren't formulas necessarily in the way that they're tools, right? And I think cooking is such a good analogy where you don't put, paprika in everything that you make, right? But you might know that this recipe might use some paprika, or maybe we should fry this instead of boiling it, or, those types of things. So these are tools that you can definitely use for sure. So thanks, Beth. That's great. Blue says it jumped. Blue says seems easier to see the distinct parts in older songs. Bridges seem to be separate chord and melodic structures and lyrically, and a step back perspective wise. Sometimes, yeah, I think, again, it really depends on sometimes the genre. Sometimes it depends on the time frame. What happens is there's a lot of trends that happen in music too, where music changes over time. So people, because there's a certain aspect of people copying each other. Like no art is completely original, right? It's influenced by something else. And I think we're influenced not only by what's happening in the world, but also what people hear at any given time. So I think genres evolve and styles evolve for sure. Eve says, so the pre-chorus starts on D, but it would be in the verse. I guess I didn't pay attention to the chords. And then Irish says, it's not the length or the number of lines, similarity or difference between what matters, whether the lines engages audience and emotions and thoughts, for sure. And creating that contrast, for sure. Oh, I see. So Eve says he meant, do I consider the one part to be part of the verse, or is it a pre-chorus? To me, it sounds like a pre-chorus because it changed the melodic motif and it changed the chord progression. So I would consider that a new section. But some people may hear it as one long verse. Again, it doesn't necessarily matter what you're calling it. It matters how you're interpreting it and then how you can use that tool in your own writing. So as we have about a half hour left or so, let's jump into talking about rewriting and getting into the nuts and bolts here. But first, I have a question for all of you. So as as we're wrapping up talking about bridges, have you picked up anything today that you feel like you can use in your next song that you write or songs coming up? Like, what do you feel like you're going to try in your writing? Does anybody want to share any ideas of something that they picked up today that they're like, I want to try this next time?
I will share. Sorry.
We'll go to Larry and then we'll come to Richard. Larry.
Hey, yeah. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. This is very informative. I have a song sitting on the table right now, and the bridge down section was something that I haven't tried or didn't know I was trying it, but the bridge and then the bridge down before you go back into the chorus was a technique that I haven't used that may be the solution to a track that I was working on that wasn't quite happening. So that tip right there was worth listening in for. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that it helps, and welcome. Thanks for coming. Hazeline.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
I think with me, because I've been studying bridges for for a little bit, and I was always stuck at the beginning because I always was told, okay, yeah, you make the chords different and stuff like that, but I didn't feel like I had like a good grasp. I would hear these bridges and songs that just sound so interesting, and I liked how you had said, try as much contrast as possible. Like, don't just stick to one thing where it's just the chords, but like the melody, maybe even the number of lines, like break it up as much as possible so it stands out. And so I'm going to try that a little bit more because it just seemed like I got a little bit in a rut where I was only thinking about the chords.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. So we got you some new tools in the toolbox then. Thank you. In the chat, Samuel says he wants to try switching up the groove during the bridge. So definitely, experimenting with groove and contrast in groove is really important for sure. Jeff says as a new songwriter, he's enjoying the context that we're putting around these. So that's great. Steven says as a new songwriter, he has a better understanding of what a bridge is and how it works in the song. Awesome. Blue has a question, I think, for Larry. Larry, you had said from the bridge down. Does that mean from the bridge going forward, or what did you mean by that?
No, I guess you'll call it a bridge one and a bridge two, where you make the change. The contrast is evident that there's a bridge, but coming out of the bridge, two of the songs had what you refer to as a down bridge, and then it entered back into the chorus where it really relaxed. It peaked. The bridge really contrasted and peaked, but it had a down bridge. Christian music does it a lot because it's a chant section, and I have used the contrast part where you take it somewhere else, but going right into the chorus sometimes gets to be repetitive. So that down part, to just relax it after you reach the peak of the song and tell what it's all about, and then relax it. Three other songs, I guess most of the songs we listened to, except maybe the Tom Petty song, because it had a solo, had that tension relaxed. And then Katy Perry's song relaxed because the verses were melodically, lyrically very wordy. So her bridge removed the words and just changed the melody and just simplified it because the choruses were so wordy and melodic, just a lot of melody in the lyric. So their contrast was take it all out at the bridge. So those tips are things that I knew about, but I just never thought of how to use them. So listening today and going through the technique with you, Chad, really explained it. And I think I don't mean rewrite the song, but just the tension release part of the bridge is what I think I was missing.
Awesome. Very cool. Beth says it actually gives her multiple ideas for songs that she's been struggling with. And clarifying the purpose of the bridge and the fact that it can be done through instrumentation, production, or unique emphasis on a chorus or verse helps to give her options. I think options is the key word there. Tom has a great question, and something that I didn't mention earlier, but I kind of meant to, is you will sometimes hear a bridge called a middle eight, or a B section. You'll hear a bridge either called a B section or middle eight, where it's basically, a lot of times in some songs, it would be 8 bars of something different where it's that contrasting section. But again, you don't have to have 8 bars. That just kind of became a kind of popularized way of referring to bridges throughout like musical history. Jay, did you have a question?
No, I was just gonna comment on what you were asking. And honestly, I feel as though I really got a lot out of this workshop so far, just because bridges for me is an area where I just kind of let go. I didn't really ever feel comfortable with it. It didn't seem to grab like everything else, like verses, like choruses, or even production. So I wanted to come and circle back to it. And now that I'm getting a better sense of the peripherals, coming back to it and all the opportunities and bridges, really even creating another song within the song. There's just so much dynamically that can be done with it. I think that's kind of what threw me off trying to conceptualize it so I could absorb it. And your, as per usual, your workshops really help guide me to it. So in the future, I look forward to getting to it and from a place that I'm not kind of wobbling from everything else as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jay. So let's go ahead and move forward into rewriting. So final rewriting of the song. And the reason why I wanted to add this part of the talk is because I'm a songwriter that writes a lot of songs. Once I feel a song is done, I don't necessarily go back and change it because I have so many other ideas that I would just rather write a new song than kind of go back and change older ones. But I learned to really think of rewriting as editing. And that's not the way that I thought about it before, because I took the connotation of rewriting was totally throwing something away and redoing it. But it's really about editing and like refining. So as you think about rewriting, try to think of it as refining and editing before you either have it complete or before you release it. And by release, I mean before it's at a point where you maybe want to perform it for people, or maybe you are actually releasing it. You know, technology is awesome now, so all of us can release our own music online. We can make CDs, we can make whatever. But definitely think about rewriting as that editing portion, and sort of polishing might be another way to say it as well. Also, you don't have to rewrite something that's working. If you like something and you're like, this is how I want it, it's delivering the message that I want, it's communicating emotion, you don't have to change it. So you don't always have to rewrite everything. But the key is to train yourself to spot when things are not working or if things are bugging you in your song. So I think Beth said something about, you know, being able to spot what she's hearing and what she wants to change. That's really what rewriting becomes, is you want to get to the point where you don't need someone else to review your song because you have that eye for what's not clicking for you. Because I think it's dangerous to always get outside opinions on your songs, because then you lose your self-confidence of your own unique artistic style, and you start chasing what you want other people, or what other people want your song to be. So be careful not to over rewrite, and also give your song space. You know, if and ultimately, if you can't get it to work, you can let it go for a while or forever. Like some songs maybe just aren't meant to be finished. So don't feel bad if you throw some songs away as well, but keep all that stuff just in case it pops up later in the future. So common things to look for in rewriting, and this is kind of a long list, so we'll kind of go through these, and again, this will be posted online as well. So one of the common things to look for is, are you telling too much and not showing enough? And what we mean by that is, are you using all emotional language that can't be experienced through your senses? Like, are you not giving us anything concrete that we can see in our mind? So look at your songs and say, like, are there ways that I can say something through concrete images instead of just saying it? An example would be in I Drive Your Truck, where it says, Mom asked me if I've been by your grave. That told us that the person passed away. And I think we instantly knew that they passed away because of the military, because everything else that was shown to us. He didn't have to say, or the writer didn't have to say, the person was killed in service, right? So make sure that you're showing. Also, be careful that your verses are not saying the same exact thing and your story's not advancing. I see this a lot in other people's songs, and to be honest, I'm still guilty of it too. Like sometimes I kind of say the exact same thing in my verses in just a different way. You know, so you want to make sure that you're not just repeating the same point in every verse. Also, make sure that, or one other thing to watch out for is not enough contrast between your song sections. I think we've talked a lot about contrast today, but it's such an important part of songwriting that I don't think we can overstate the contrast. So look for how your sections are contrasting. Is there enough change? Do they sound enough different to keep your listener engaged in the song? Also, one thing to watch out for is overuse of perfect rhymes. And perfect rhymes are where the vowels and the consonants match exactly. And there are 5 different types of rhymes that range from very stable and perfect to very unstable. And that spectrum of rhyme is used to match the content of the lyric, meaning the prosody of what you're trying to say. So if you're writing a really unstable topic or a topic that is very sad or frantic or very emotional, and you use a bunch of perfect rhymes, those rhymes don't fit what the lyric is saying, and the rhymes can actually take more attention away from what you're saying, and it will pull your listener out of your song because they're no longer emotionally immersed in this virtual experience. They're hearing rhymes. And I think one thing to watch out for is forcing those rhymes as well. Another thing is language that is not conversational or relatable. So some people will call it Yoda speak, where you change the order of how things are said just to force that rhyme. And you say things that people don't say in everyday conversation. So songs are not really the place to show off your vocabulary. They're really a place to communicate emotions in the most effective way possible. And a lot of times using bigger words and flowery language, again, pulls your listener out of the song, and they know they're listening to a song, so they're not experiencing it as an emotional experience. Susan in the chat says, look at it from the audience's perspective. How does someone listening see this? Doing that is important so you don't confuse or show biases that you don't see yourself. Yes, and I would say audience meaning people that don't know you, because people that know you will blow smoke up your butt all the time and tell you that your songs are better than they are. And it a lot of times it builds your ego when you probably have some work to do. But pay attention not to what people say, but their body language when they're listening to your song. Are they actually paying attention? Are they going to their phone? Are they looking away? Like, do they stop talking? Like, if you're doing a gig and you're playing an original song and people are talking, you didn't capture them, right? But if you go up there and you start playing your song and it gets quiet, you've got them. So pay attention to the things, not so much that people say, but how they react to your music as well. So other things to watch out for in rewriting, do your melodies lack motif? Are your verse melodies too different? And what I mean by that is your verses really should have very similar melodies to each other. So your first verse should have almost an identical melody to your second verse and other verses as well. Because if it's too different, your listener doesn't know where they are, and people crave repetition. I know a lot of songwriters look negatively on repetition because there are some overly repetitive songs that sort of kill it, but I will guarantee that 90% of the time, you're not using as much repetition as you think you are, and you could probably afford to use some more repetition. And one of the ways to do that is make sure your verses match. Also, I'm guilty of this is I rely a lot on the chorus to save my song, which means, you know, the chorus is the hook. And I think, well, if I have a really strong hook, the chorus is what people remember, right? So my verse doesn't have to be as strong. Well, true to a certain extent, but your verse is what they have to wade through before they even get to your chorus. And if you can catch them in that verse, then that helps you as well. Blue asks, melodies lacking motif, please explain. So a melodic motif is a repeated melodic phrase or a pattern within a section. So think of a melodic motif like in the song James Taylor, Fire and Rain. The motif is da 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 like let's say a motif would be the da 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 da. So that's a repeated melodic phrase or a group of phrases that repeats. So a motif is an identifiable phrase or pattern that's used over and over again. So what I hear a lot of writers do is their first line has a melody where it's like da 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 da. Second line da 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 da. Third line da 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 da. And then the fourth line is da 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 da. There was no repetition. So your motif is where you would repeat what one of those lines is doing to create almost like what I hear in a lot of hit songs is the motif scheme or the motif structure matches the rhyme scheme. So lines that rhyme have the same melody line. And you'll see that a lot in a lot of commercial music, where if a line rhymes, it has the same melody as the other lines that it rhymes with. So that's one way to think about melodic motif. Whoops. Also, watch for point of view and tense issues within your song. You know, sometimes you might throw in some pronouns and you think it makes total sense because you're talking about he and you and them and all of these things, but you might have not have established who all those people are for your listener. So watch to make sure that you're not throwing your listeners off. And then tense deals with the time and the, is it happening now? Is it happening in the past? Is it happening in the future? Make sure that you're saying what you need to say. Also, make sure that you're not trying to say too much in your songs. Songs are truly about small moments in time. And I think I see a lot of writers try to write one song about an entire relationship. Like they'll go from the day that they met, and then by the end of the song, they're 90 years old and they're in rocking chairs on a porch, right? That's a lot of ground to cover within one song. You can do it, but the best songs really focus on one event or one small snapshot in time. And Susan says a snippet of time. Exactly. So that's something to think about too, is try not to include too much information for your listener. Like it's more important to have a really good experience about one moment in time than a mediocre experience of a large piece of time. And then also make sure that you're using some form of rhyme scheme, because your listener uses rhymes as sort of like traffic lights. They kind of know where they are in their path by knowing where the lines rhyme. And rhyme is the equivalent of chords. So like rhymes are like in lyric, a rhyme is, so a rhyme in lyric is the equivalent of a chord in harmony. So you can use those to show changes, to show where your listener is within the song. Susan says they'll fill in their feelings to what you don't spell out. You have to leave them room to do it for them, connect fully with the song, in her opinion. Sure. So that there's a balance there, because there's kind of schools of thought where you can be too vague and you can be too specific as well. So you kind of have to balance being vague and specific. But a lot of times showing exact imagery is better than being too vague. You know, if and you can create pictures by being specific. So an example would be like, she drove a car into my driveway. But what if I said she drove a BMW into my driveway? That changes the experience to paint the picture of a certain type of car in someone's mind. So your job as the writer is to think about, what am I trying to show them? Because you're you know, for instance, in the song what is it called? It starts with turn down the lights, turn down the bed. What is the song called? Something love me if you don't. I don't remember the
I
title.
can't make you love me.
Yes, I can't make you love me. That's what it is. Turn down the lights, turn down the bed, turn down these voices inside my head. Like when you said turn down the lights, turn down the bed, all of us saw a color of the sheets on the bed, but none of us heard what those colors were, right? Like, so your listener does finish your song for you. So you have to give them just enough to let them sort of fill in the blanks and kind of put the furniture into the room for you. Richard says a concrete image is a passport into the vastness of the listener's own life experience. That's awesome, for sure. So questions to ask yourself while you review your own songs. So this is like I said, kind of being your own reviewer, your own critique, your critic. And first I should say, don't invite your critic in until you've got like a draft and you're farther in the process, because if you invite your critic in too soon, you'll get what people refer to as writer's block, which is usually just you're worried too much about good or bad, so you don't write anything. So questions to ask. Does your first verse set up who, when, and where? Also, is your point of view consistent? And is the tense consistent? And does the tense drive the story? And do your song sections have a contrasting rhyme scheme? So that means, do the rhyme schemes vary from your verse to the pre-chorus to the chorus to the bridge? Like, one of the ways to build in contrast is to change your rhyme scheme from section to section. Also, do you use different types of rhyme? It's usually not a great idea to always use perfect rhyme, because it makes your song sound a lot of times nursery rhymey, and there's so many different ways to rhyme that you are probably limiting yourself to just a few words, where you could be tapping into a bunch of different words that are out there. Also, make sure your lyrics are conversational and they're not forced. And that means, would someone actually say this to another person? And does that flow of language fit within the meter or the time signature? So are you putting unstressed syllables on stressed beats? Because when that happens, it instantly sounds weird and your listener will tune out. Also, does your melody build energy as the song progresses? And does the chorus state the why or the emotional center of your song? And again, we talked about, do your verses match melodically? So do your verses all have the same melody? Those are things to watch out for. Also, do your choruses have the same melody and lyrics? I'm of the school of thought that you shouldn't change your chorus, because if you are changing your chorus, that usually means that you're not setting it up correctly with your verses. And if you have to change your chorus when it comes around, something else might not be working within your song. Also, can you sing or hum the melodies without any music? If you can't sing or hum your melody without music, it's probably not that strong of a melody, and it might be something for you to go back and look at as you're reviewing. Also, be sure to read your lyrics out loud as if an actor was performing them. Does it make sense? Can you feel the rhythmic contrast between the sections? Does it emotionally progress? Does it, have any parts that stand out or don't really match what you're trying to say? Also, is the title obvious? Especially for people who have the goal of writing commercially or having someone else cut their songs, titles are so important. And I always cringe a little bit when people say, I wrote a song, but I don't know what it's called. So to me, that says they don't know what the center of their song is, and it's probably lacking something. So I always try to make sure that my title is easily identifiable, because that's how listeners look for songs as well. And people always say, well, what about the Goo Goo Dolls? They had a song called Iris. That song has nothing to do with Iris, and it was still a big hit. Well, yeah, but could it have been a bigger hit if they actually would have called it something that was related to the lyric? Probably. And I just think we have to learn the rules before we, break them a little bit as well. Also, when you're reviewing your songs, does the music support the prosody? So what I mean by that is, does your music support the emotional message and the story that your lyrics are trying to say? Because you will never outright the emotion of the music. Your lyric will never be strong enough to overcome the lyric or the emotion of the music. So an example of that is the song Pumped Up Kicks. The song is about a school shooting, really dark topic, but the music is very upbeat and, almost borderline, I wouldn't say happy or joyful, but there's kind of an optimism to it. But when you ask people the feeling of that song, they always say that it's upbeat, but it has a dark message, right? But those lyrics don't deliver the dark message. That's kind of almost a satirical way to write that most people don't do well. So 90% of the time, I would say that you want your music to support what your lyrics are trying to say, because your listener will feel the music more than they feel the lyrics at first. Also, does your song keep your interest? Do you listen to your own song, and do you have parts where you sort of tune out? That is kind of not a good thing. Also, pay attention where you cringe when you play songs for other people. I know that when you play songs for other people, there are times where your whole body tenses up and you're like, ugh. And then you're like, hopefully they don't notice that, or hopefully they hopefully they like that. That's something to look at and see why or what you might be able to do to fix it as well. Also, one of the other things that you can do as you're rewriting and looking for ways to make your songs more interesting is go through and outline the verbs within your song and see if you can go to a thesaurus and pick other verbs that tell your story in a more powerful way. And try to avoid adjectives and adverbs, because a lot of times people think, well, I want to write more imagery and I want to write more color into my songs, and they instantly go to adjectives. But it's much more powerful to pick the right verbs and more powerful nouns than it is to describe something, because adjectives actually take the focus away from the word that you're trying to highlight. So one of the ways to do that is to try to replace your nouns and your verbs within your song. Also, as you're reviewing, do you have any filler lines? Like, are there lines that you sort of just settled on as you were writing because you couldn't think of anything else, or it just happened to work? Like that was the first thing that popped in. Look for those lines and see if you can outdo it. See if you can make it better. Also, does the song sound cliche? I think sometimes learning what cliche sounds like is important as well. And what cliche is something that's been said over and over again and to the point where it doesn't mean anything anymore. And a lot of different parts of songs can be cliche. It can be the lyrics that sound cliche. It can be the rhyme schemes that sound cliche. One way to think about cliche is it predictable? Like, I'm sure we've all heard songs where you can almost call out what the next line is going to be, right? Like, you know exactly what it's going to rhyme like, you know exactly what it's going to say. That's a good sign of you're writing a song that someone else has already written. And one of the ways to avoid cliches is to use more specific imagery, because the more specific your imagery is, more than likely the cliche perspective goes down. Also, listen to your songs, and is there a pleasant sense of familiarity in the chord progression and the harmonic rhythm? And what I mean by this is, are the chords done in a way that feel good with what you're trying to accomplish? And does it sound familiar to you, and does it sound familiar to the listener? And what I mean by familiar is, does it work? Like, are there any places where something stands out and it's almost like a jolt? And having jolts within your writing is great if that's what the lyric is saying or that's what your message is, but a lot of times that's not the case. We already talked about this one. Do you have a mix of showing and telling lyrics? We already talked about this one too. Have you played your song for anyone? Pay attention to how they respond, both verbally and non-verbally. And that's it. So if you want more tips and things, go to my YouTube channel, At Home Songwriting. So that's all that I had prepared, but we definitely have a few minutes if you guys have anything to talk about, either in the chat or we can just chat for a few minutes as well. So was this helpful for you? How are you guys feeling after this? Kathleen says great. Eve says great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you. So next workshop is Tuesday, the 22nd. We're going to be talking about contrast, prosody, and repetition. And we're going to give you tools for each of those. So make sure that you RSVP on meetup.com for that. It's at 7 p.m. Central on Tuesday, the 22nd. Hazeline has a question. What's your question?
Yeah, I do have a question. I noticed when I listen to songs like maybe on American Idol or something, when someone's performing and they're trying to really dramatic, something that caught my attention is when there's like a song and it's powerful and it like has something in it that makes the singer, if they know how to deliver well, where it just sort of like, it just comes across powerful. And I was wondering what, because you study so much, I'm just blown away by all the stuff you know. What is it that's doing that? Is it the tension that they're building and the release? Or is it like, I noticed sometimes it might be an octave jump that they're doing. Like, what are those elements? Is it, at first I thought, well, it's because they're putting a bridge, it's the bridge, because the bridge, I was always felt like the bridge was giving it a lift, but the more I learn about bridges, it doesn't have to be written to where it's like the lift of the song. It could just be different, you know? So I was wondering what you thought. That power that comes to certain songs, if it's more about tension maybe than I was thinking it might be the sections in it.
Yeah. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, because you're talking about like those belting songs that like a Kelly Clarkson or like somebody with like a really strong belty voice can sing, and they just, you know, it takes you somewhere. I think I think it is tension and release, and I think it's contrast as well. I mean, if you listen to those songs, the verses build a floor, right? So your verses are going to be lower in energy, and energy encompasses everything. So that encompasses pitch, it encompasses production, it encompasses the chords that they're using, all of those things. So what they will do is the verses will be lower, so that gives you room to soar when it comes time to soar, either in the chorus or the bridge. So you have that contrast between sections. But the other things that they're doing are going deeper into like music theory, where they're using stable and unstable chords to build tension harmonically. So the chord progression is building that tension, but the melody is actually building it as well, because within any scale or within any key, there are stable and unstable notes. And a lot of times what's happening is they're singing unstable notes in the verse, which means they're singing probably like the 2, the 4, and the 6 of the scale. But then when you get to your chorus or your bridge, they're either going to like the tonic, the subdominant, or the dominant, which means the 1, the 4, or the 5, which gives you that it gives you more stability, and it feels more resolved. So they're either making you feel resolution, or they're making you feel not resolved. So what those songwriters are very good at is understanding how notes relate with chords and how they use contrast to make notes stand out. And then they also have people that sing really good. I mean, I think it can't be understated how a good vocalist can help as well. But it really comes down to how are the notes in the melody relating to the chords, and then also the vowels that are being sung. If you notice those belting songs, they're belting on like the vowels that are easier to sing. They're either oohs or a's. It's very rare that you would hear them belt on like an E because it sounds so nasally, so they're thinking about what words are they hitting on those notes to make them singable like that. I wish I could write like that. So I don't know if I'm the expert on how to write, how to write the power ballad, but yeah.
Yeah, that does help, because that makes sense with the vowels. Because it wouldn't, like if they're singing a German song, you wouldn't want to have all these harsh words that are like at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the key though is to just, analyze them yourself. I think Hazeline, didn't you say you study composition as well? So I think there's probably some concepts there that come into play as well.
Yeah, trying to mix the two is really hard, because songwriting really is a beast of its own. And so I'm trying to like mesh both together, and that's taking some time. So, because they work well together, and mesh it together.
Absolutely. Awesome question. Anybody else have any final questions or thoughts before we wrap up today? Well, thank you all so much for spending part of your Saturday with me. It's been awesome. Again, go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It helps get the videos out to more people, and watch and share and all of that good stuff. I really appreciate that. All you have to do is go to athomesongwriting.com, and that will take you right to the YouTube channel, and then my email address and how you can contact me is there. And then you can also reach out to me through meetup.com as well. I get those messages directly, and I know that I've communicated with some of you directly that way too. So again, thank you guys so much. This is fun for me, and hopefully it's helpful for you, and someday you can thank me on the Grammys.
Thanks a lot, Chad.
Yeah, have a good rest of the day.